Life's greatest and most valuable lessons are often hidden deep within its darkest and most difficult moments. Watch, learn, and evolve along with us as we explore the resilience of the human spirit. Hit subscribe to stay updated on every new lesson.
The morning my husband's girlfriend walked into our company's annual gala wearing my late mother's pearl earrings, I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I picked up my champagne glass, took a slow sip, and smiled at her from across the room. She mistook that smile for devastation. She was wrong. My name is Claire. I'm 41 years old. I run the legal affairs division of a mid-sized pharmaceutical consulting firm called Hargrove and Reed, or at least, I used to run a division. By the time that evening was over, I ran considerably more than that. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand what happened at the Whitmore Hotel on a Thursday night in March, you need to understand the 7 years that came before it. I met my husband Marcus at a conference in Boston when I was 33. He was charming in the way that only certain men know how to be, attentive without being obvious. Funny without trying too hard. He asked smart questions and remembered the answers. On our third date, he told me that he'd always admired women who knew what they wanted. I believed him, because back then, I was still the kind of woman who took people at their word. We got married 18 months later in a small ceremony in Vermont. My mother flew in from Portland. She wore a pale blue dress and cried through the entire reception. 3 weeks after the wedding, she was diagnosed with early-stage dementia. Within 2 years, she was gone. Before she passed, she pressed a small velvet box into my hands during one of her last lucid afternoons. Inside were her pearl earrings, simple drops, nothing extravagant, but she'd worn them on her own wedding day, and her mother had worn them before that. For when you need to feel steady, she told me. I kept them in the top drawer of my nightstand, next to my passport and the copy of my grandmother's recipe for lemon cake. Not in a safe. Not behind a lock. I trusted the people in my home. That was my first mistake, though not my last. Marcus and I had built something real together, or so I believed. When he came to me 4 years into our marriage with the idea for a separate venture, a boutique consulting spin-off targeting biotech startups, I didn't hesitate. I used a significant portion of my inheritance from my mother's estate to fund the initial operating costs. Marcus had the industry contacts and the vision, he said. I had the capital and the legal expertise. We drew up a partnership structure, filed the paperwork, and I went back to my day job while he built the client roster. Within 18 months, the spin-off, he named it Meridian Partners, was turning a modest profit. Within 3 years, it was doing very well. Marcus hired a small team, moved into a proper office, and started attending industry events. He started traveling more. He started coming home later. I told myself it was the nature of the work. I told myself a lot of things. The first real indication came 14 months before the gala. I was filing our joint taxes and noticed a recurring expense under the Meridian accounts, a restaurant called 16 Tables, billed consistently on Friday evenings. Marcus had told me he was spending those Fridays at a standing dinner with a pharmaceutical client from Chicago. The name on the client file was a company called Voss Bio. When I quietly looked up Voss Bio one afternoon, I found a 2-person LLC incorporated 8 months earlier with no public-facing employees, no website, and a registered address that turned out to be a UPS store in River North. I didn't confront him. I'm a lawyer. I know better than to show your hand before you've finished building your case. I hired a private investigator named Dale, a former Cook County detective, who came recommended by a colleague. I told him I needed documentation, not assumptions. Over the following 4 months, Dale gave me exactly that. Photographs. Receipts. Hotel records. Her name was Simone. She was 34, worked in marketing for a biotech firm, and had apparently been in my husband's life for nearly 2 years by the time I found out. She was also, according to Dale's notes, the kind of woman who wore other people's things without asking. I discovered the earrings were missing on a Tuesday morning in January, about 6 weeks before the gala. I opened my nightstand drawer and the velvet box was there, but it was empty. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. I thought about my mother's hands pressing that box into mine. I thought about what it means when someone enters the most private space in your home and takes something that belongs to the dead. I closed the drawer. I went to work. I made a phone call that afternoon to the attorney who had helped me structure my original investment in Meridian Partners. Here is something people don't fully appreciate about founding investment agreements. When they are drafted carefully, and mine was. Because I drafted it myself, they contain provisions that most junior partners don't bother to read past the first page. Ours included a clause stipulating that in the event of documented financial misconduct or undisclosed conflicts of interest on the part of either partner, the other party retained the right to trigger a full equity review and, pending that review, assume interim operational authority. Marcus had signed that document at our kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, with a cup of coffee in his hand, while half watching a football game. He had not read past the first page. Over the 6 weeks between finding the empty velvet box and the night of the gala, I worked quietly and carefully. I requested an independent audit of Meridian's financials through the firm's outside accountants within my rights under the partnership agreement. The audit, which Marcus believed was a routine annual review, turned up what Dale had suspected. A pattern of personal expenses run through the business, including hotel stays, jewelry purchases, and 2 international flights to Cancun. All charged to the company, and all corresponding to dates Marcus had told me he was traveling for work. One of the jewelry purchases made 11 months earlier at a small boutique on Michigan Avenue matched the description of a pearl earring set. I had everything I needed. My attorney filed the interim authority paperwork on a Wednesday. The gala was the following Thursday. I want to be clear. I didn't plan to do what I did at the gala for theater. I'm not built for theater. But Marcus had specifically asked me to attend, insisted on it, called it a critical client-facing event that required both of us present as a united front. In retrospect, I think he had already told Simone she could come. I think they had discussed it. I think part of what they had planned was for her to walk in wearing those earrings and watch my face. They had been planning their little performance for weeks. I had simply been planning a different one. The Whitmore Hotel ballroom was full by the time I arrived. 200 people, open bar, a string quartet near the far windows. Marcus was already working the room when I walked in. He spotted me, smiled, came over, kissed my cheek. He smelled like the same cologne he'd worn on our first date. I used to love that smell. You look beautiful, he said. Thank you, I said. I feel very steady tonight. He didn't understand what I meant. He moved away to greet a client, and I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing server and positioned myself near the entrance, where I had a clear sightline to the door. She arrived at 40 minutes past 7. Simone was striking, I'll give her that. She wore a black dress and moved through the entrance with the deliberate ease of someone who has rehearsed their entrance. She scanned the room once, found Marcus across the ballroom, and let a small smile settle onto her face. Then she turned slightly, and I saw them. My mother's pearl earrings, hanging from her ears like she had been born wearing them. I took a sip of champagne. A colleague appeared at my elbow, Sandra, our head of business development, who knew nothing of any of this. Claire, you have to try the salmon, she said. I smiled at her. We talked for 4 minutes about the salmon. The entire time, I watched Simone make her way toward Marcus, watched him register her presence, watched the almost imperceptible stiffening of his posture as he realized both of us were in the same room. He had not expected me to be calm. That was his second miscalculation. The moment I'd been waiting for came 40 minutes later. Marcus had gathered a small cluster of his key clients near the bar, 4 people, all of them significant relationships for Meridian. I watched her place her hand on Marcus's arm, a gesture so casually possessive that 2 of the clients noticed and exchanged a glance. I set down my champagne glass and walked over. Marcus, I said pleasantly, I was hoping to say a few words to the Hensley group before the evening gets away from us. He turned. For a fraction of a second, something moved across his face, relief, maybe, that I seemed composed. Of course, he said. Do you all know my wife, Claire? We do, said Robert Hensley, extending his hand. Always good to see you, Claire. Marcus tells me you've been less involved with Meridian lately. That's actually something I wanted to address, I said. And I reached into my small clutch and produced a single folded document. Not a dramatic gesture, just the natural movement of someone retrieving a business card. As of Wednesday, I've resumed my position as interim managing partner, pending completion of an audit. You'll be receiving formal correspondence from our legal team early next week. But I wanted you to hear it from me directly. Robert Hensley looked at the document. He looked at Marcus. Marcus had gone very still. This is a surprise, Robert said. It surprised me too, I said, keeping my tone entirely even. Certain financial discrepancies came to light during our routine review. Nothing that affects client accounts. I want to be clear about that, but it does require some internal restructuring. I turned to Simone then. She was standing just outside the cluster, close enough to have heard every word. Her expression caught somewhere between confusion and the beginning of alarm. I don't think we've been properly introduced, I said. I'm Claire. Simone, she said, after a pause. Beautiful earrings, I said. She touched one reflexively, a small, involuntary gesture that told me everything I already knew. Her eyes went to Marcus. His jaw was tight. A muscle worked in his cheek. They were my mother's, I said, still pleasantly. She wore them on her wedding day. I've been looking for them. The silence that followed was not long. Maybe 4 seconds. But 4 seconds is a very long time when 200 people are in a room and the string quartet has just finished a piece and the ambient noise has momentarily dipped. Robert Hensley cleared his throat. The other clients found sudden interest in their drinks. Simone's hand was still at her ear. I'd like them back before you leave tonight, I said. I'll have the coat check attendant hold them for me. No need to make it a production. I turned back to Robert. I'll have my assistant send over the transition brief by Monday. I'm sorry for any uncertainty this creates. Our priority is continuity of service for all existing clients. I extended my hand. He shook it. I walked away. I did not look back at Marcus. At 9:15, a coat check attendant found me near the exit and handed me a small folded cocktail napkin. Inside were my mother's pearl earrings. I closed my fingers around them and stood very still for a moment. The string quartet was playing something slow. The room was warm. Sandra appeared again. Are you leaving? In a few minutes, I said. You seem remarkably relaxed for someone who just quietly detonated a bomb in the middle of a gala. I laughed a real laugh. The first one in months. I've had some time to prepare. What followed over the next several weeks was not easy, and I won't pretend otherwise. The audit concluded formally with findings that my attorney described as substantially actionable. There were difficult conversations. And then there were conversations conducted entirely through lawyers. And then there was a mediation session in a conference room in the Loop, where Marcus looked at me across a table with something in his face that I couldn't quite name. Not remorse, exactly, but perhaps the recognition of an error in judgment so foundational that it would take years to fully comprehend. The partnership agreement held. My investment stake, combined with the misconduct provisions, gave me controlling interest in Meridian. Marcus retained a minority share, but operational authority transferred to me. He resigned from day-to-day management within 30 days. Simone's involvement in Meridian: she had been listed as a consultant for Voss Bio, which had received a small exploratory contract from Meridian the previous year, was flagged during the audit as an undisclosed conflict of interest. The contract was voided. I understand she left the city not long after. I filed for divorce in April. The proceedings were not pleasant, but they were not complicated. We had a prenuptial agreement. Marcus had been the one to request it, which I had always found faintly ironic, given how things turned out. The prenup was thorough. My original investment in Meridian, and the returns stemming from it, were clearly delineated as separate property. My attorney called it one of the cleaner asset separations she'd handled in years. There are things I still think about. The 7 years I spent believing in something that turned out to be less than what I thought it was. The way grief makes you soft in places you don't notice until someone finds those places and puts them to use. I don't know exactly when Marcus decided I was someone to be managed rather than loved. I'm not sure it matters. What I do know is this. The women who scare people are not the ones who yell. They're the ones who listen, and file, and wait. They're the ones who understand that patience is not the same as passivity, and that a woman who goes quiet has not necessarily gone anywhere. My mother used to say that the strongest thing you can do in a room full of chaos is refuse to add to it. She said it about a lot of situations: difficult family dinners, frustrating clients, the everyday frictions of a life lived alongside other people. I didn't fully understand what she meant until I was standing in a hotel ballroom with champagne in my hand, watching my husband's face go gray in front of his most important clients. She was right, as she usually was. The earrings are back in their velvet box, in the top drawer of my nightstand, in the apartment I rented in Lincoln Park after I moved out of the house. It's smaller than what I was used to, with tall windows that let in good morning light. I make my grandmother's lemon cakes sometimes on Sundays. I've started running again along the lakefront in the early mornings before the path gets crowded. Meridian is doing well. We brought in a new managing director in June, a woman named Patricia who had been COO at a larger firm and wanted something she could help shape. We meet every Tuesday morning. She asks good questions and remembers the answers. I was telling someone this story recently, a friend, over dinner, and she stopped me partway through and said, "Weren't you furious?" I thought about it honestly. "Yes," I said. "But fury is loud. Loud things announce themselves before they arrive." She asked what I'd felt in the moment, standing in that ballroom, watching Simone touch my mother's earrings. "Steady," I said. That was the word I'd used with Marcus when he told me I looked beautiful. I'd meant it then, and I meant it now, not as something I had always been, but as something I had become, in the long quiet months of preparing for a night that I knew was coming, in the space between grief and action, in the particular stillness of a woman who has already decided exactly what she is going to do. The string quartet was good that night, now that I think about it. I remember standing near the exit with the earrings closed in my palm, listening to the last few bars of whatever they were playing. It was something slow and clean, with a resolution you could feel coming 3 notes before it arrived. I stayed until the end of the piece. Then I got my coat, and I walked out into the night, and I didn't look back.